The metallic hum of the teleportation beam filled the human space station as a towering alien figure slowly took shape on the bridge. Ambassador Krelthak stood nearly 8 feet tall, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the station's lights. His forearms moved with calculated precision, and his insect-like mandibles clicked as he surveyed the humans before him with obvious contempt. For 3,000 years, the Vorthak Empire had swept across the galaxy like a plague. 800 civilizations had fallen before their might. The pattern was always the same: arrive, demand surrender, and either enslave or exterminate. No species had ever dared to refuse. Why would these primitive mammals be any different? Admiral Kim stepped forward from the assembled human crew. She was shorter than the alien ambassador by several feet, but her posture radiated quiet confidence. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her crisp navy uniform bore the insignia of Earth's combined fleet. Behind her stood Captain Lee, a younger officer whose hand rested casually near his sidearm. "I am Admiral Kim of the Human Defense Force," she said, her voice steady and professional. "You may deliver your message, Ambassador." Krelthak's compound eyes glittered with amusement. The audacity of these creatures was almost entertaining. They stood before a representative of the galaxy's most powerful empire, as if they were equals. How delightfully ignorant. "I bring greetings from the glorious Vorthak Empire," he began, his voice a harsh rasp that echoed through the bridge. "Your species has been selected for integration into our domain. This is not a negotiation. You will surrender all human territories, submit your population for classification and work assignment, and accept Vorthak rule. Those who comply will be granted swift deaths when their usefulness ends." The human crew exchanged glances, but their faces remained impassive. Admiral Kim tilted her head slightly, as if considering the offer with genuine interest. "The same generous terms you offered the Altarians?" she asked conversationally. "Or perhaps the Centauri colonies?" Krelthak's mandibles clicked faster. How did these primitives know about those conquests? Intelligence reports indicated humans had barely achieved interstellar travel. They shouldn't know anything about Vorthak military campaigns in distant sectors. "Those civilizations made their choices," he hissed, his voice taking on a more threatening tone. "The Altarians chose resistance and were reduced to cosmic dust. The Centauri submitted and now serve as laborers in our mining operations. Your species faces the same decision. Choose wisely, human." Captain Lee shifted beside Admiral Kim, his jaw tightening. The young officer had studied the reports from Altair Prime, an entire civilization of peaceful traders wiped out because they refused to abandon their homeworld. Billions of lives snuffed out in a matter of hours. Admiral Kim's expression remained unchanged, but something cold flickered in her eyes. She clasped her hands behind her back and took a small step forward. "Ambassador Krelthak," she said, her tone remaining polite, but carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. "I want to make sure I understand your position clearly. You're offering humanity the choice between slavery and extinction. Is that correct?" "Precisely," Krelthak replied, pleased that these mammals finally grasped their situation. "The Vorthak Empire spans 10,000 star systems. We have eliminated entire species that dared to oppose us. Your pathetic fleet of primitive ships cannot possibly—" "We respectfully decline your offer," Kim interrupted, her voice cutting through his speech like a blade. The bridge fell silent. Not just quiet, but utterly silent, as if the very air had stopped moving. In 3 millennia of conquest, no species had ever responded to a Vorthak ultimatum with a refusal. They begged, they negotiated, they offered tribute, but they didn't refuse. Krelthak's 4 eyes focused on the human admiral with newfound attention. "I'm sorry, I believe I misheard you. Did you just—" "Decline. Refuse. Reject," Kim said clearly. "Whatever word you prefer, the answer is no." She glanced at Captain Lee, who nodded almost imperceptibly. The younger officer's hand moved away from his weapon, but his stance suggested he was ready for anything. "Furthermore," Admiral Kim continued, stepping closer to the towering alien, "I strongly suggest you withdraw your fleet from human space and return to whatever hole you crawled out of. You should do this quickly while you still can." For the first time in his long career as a Vorthak diplomat, Krelthak found himself speechless. A counter-threat? From a species that hadn't even developed proper energy shielding? The absurdity of it struck him like a physical blow. Then he began to laugh. The sound started as a low clicking in his throat, but built into a harsh, chittering noise that echoed off the station's bulkheads. His mandibles spread wide, revealing rows of sharp teeth designed for tearing flesh. The human crew watched impassively as their visitors' amusement filled the chamber. "Magnificent!" Krelthak gasped between waves of laughter. "Absolutely magnificent. In 3,000 years of conquest, no species has ever—" He dissolved into fresh peals of mirth. Admiral Kim waited patiently for his amusement to subside, her expression never changing. When the alien ambassador finally composed himself, she spoke again. "Is there anything else, Ambassador? Or shall we consider this meeting concluded?" Krelthak wiped moisture from his compound eyes. "Oh, there is definitely something else, little human. You've just made this conquest infinitely more entertaining. I shall personally recommend that High Command deploy additional forces to your sector. Your species' destruction will serve as an excellent example to other primitives who might develop similar delusions of adequacy." He activated his personal communicator with one of his lower arms. "This is Ambassador Krelthak to Fleet. Command, the humans have refused our terms. Proceed with standard subjugation protocols. And Commander," he added with a cruel smile, "take your time with this one. I want the galaxy to remember what happens to species that dare threaten the Vorthak Empire." As the teleportation beam began to envelop him, Krelthak's laughter resumed. These humans had just signed their own death warrant, and they didn't even know it. Fleet Commander Morgath stood on the command bridge of his massive dreadnought, watching through the reinforced viewing ports as 500 Vorthak warships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. The blue-green marble of the human homeworld hung before them like a ripe fruit waiting to be plucked. This would be another routine conquest, just like the hundreds that came before. The Vorthak fleet was an impressive sight, each warship stretched over a kilometer in length, their dark hulls bristling with plasma cannons and energy projectors. They had conquered entire star systems with smaller forces. Intelligence reports from the diplomatic mission were clear. The humans possessed only 12 ships, primitive vessels that barely qualified as military craft. "Sir, sensors are detecting the human fleet moving to intercept," reported Lieutenant E. Vex talked from his tactical station. The young officer's mandibles clicked nervously as he studied his displays. "They're maintaining a loose formation approaching from the inner system." Morgath's 4 eyes focused on the tactical hologram floating above the command center. 12 tiny dots crept toward his massive fleet, like insects approaching a bonfire. Their ships were indeed pathetic, roughly half the size of even his smallest escort vessels, with energy signatures that suggested outdated propulsion systems and basic shielding. "How quaint," Morgath rumbled to his bridge crew. "They actually intend to fight us. These mammals have more courage than sense." He had commanded Vorthak fleets for over 2 centuries, participating in 47 planetary conquests. The pattern was always the same. Indigenous forces would make a token resistance before being overwhelmed by superior firepower and numbers. Most species surrendered after losing their first few ships. Those that didn't were simply eliminated more thoroughly. "All ships, this is Fleet Command," Morgath announced over the battle network. "Begin bombardment sequence. Target the human vessels first, then proceed to planetary bombardment. Keep it clean and efficient." The first salvo lit up the void between the fleets like a miniature star going nova. Hundreds of plasma bolts and energy beams lanced across space toward the human formation. The sheer volume of fire was enough to vaporize a small moon. Morgath watched with satisfaction as the brilliant display of destruction painted the darkness in shades of blue and white. When the energy dissipated and the tactical displays cleared, Morgath expected to see empty space where the human ships had been. Instead, all 12 vessels remained exactly where they had been before, their formations completely unchanged. "What?" Morgath snarled, leaning forward in his command chair. "Tactical report." Lieutenant Vextok's claws danced across his console, his compound eyes wide with confusion. Sir, sensors show no hits registered on any human vessel. It appears their defensive systems deflected or absorbed the entire barrage. Impossible, Morgath muttered. According to intelligence reports, human technology was centuries behind Vorthak standards. They shouldn't have shields capable of stopping a single plasma bolt, let alone hundreds. Target locks must have been faulty. Fire again, double the intensity. The second barrage was even more spectacular than the first. Every weapon in the Vorthak fleet opened up simultaneously, creating a wall of destructive energy that should have reduced the human ships to their component atoms. Morgath gripped the armrests of his chair as the entire bridge shook from the recoil of their own weapons. This time, something different happened. As the Vorthak energy barrage faded, 12 new points of light appeared on the tactical display. The humans were firing back. "Sir, incoming projectiles!" Vextok shouted over the suddenly urgent chatter filling the bridge. "They're using some kind of kinetic weapon system we've never encountered before." Captain Park's voice suddenly filled the Vorthak command channel, transmitted on frequencies that should have been impossible for humans to access. His tone was calm, professional, and somehow more terrifying than any battle cry. "Vorthak fleet, you were given fair warning to withdraw from human space. Since you chose to ignore that warning, prepare to face the consequences of your decision." What happened next shattered everything Morgath thought he knew about space combat. The human ships moved like nothing he had ever seen before. Instead of the predictable formation flying that every species used, they scattered into seemingly random patterns while maintaining perfect coordination. Their movements were fluid, organic, like a school of predatory fish responding to some invisible signal. Human weapons fire began finding targets with impossible precision. Where Vorthak shields should have deflected incoming rounds, massive explosions blossomed across his fleet. Ships that had survived dozens of battles were being torn apart by weapons that shouldn't have been able to penetrate their defenses. How are they doing this? Morgath roared at his tactical officer. "Our shields are rated against weapons 10 times more powerful than anything these primitives should possess. Sir, it appears they're targeting specific weak points in our shield." "Futuristic," Vextok replied, his voice barely steady. "Points that our own engineers said were impossible to exploit from external sensors." On the main display, Morgath watched in growing horror as the human ships wove through his formation like ghosts. They didn't fight like any military force he had encountered. Instead of trying to overpower Vorthak defenses, they seemed to know exactly where those defenses were weakest. Their timing was perfect, their coordination flawless, and their effectiveness absolutely devastating. The dreadnought Kethmaran exploded in a ball of superheated plasma as human weapons found its reactor core. The battle cruiser Vorthak followed. Moments later, its ammunition storage detonating in a chain reaction that took 2 escort vessels with it. Across the battlefield, proud Vorthak warships were being systematically dismantled by an enemy they had dismissed as primitive. "Sir, Admiral Zektar's flagship is requesting immediate reinforcements," came a panicked transmission from the fleet communications officer. "They've lost 60% of their escort wing and are taking heavy damage to their main systems." Morgath stared at the tactical display in disbelief. In less than 2 hours of combat, his fleet had lost over 100 ships while the humans had lost exactly 3. Their casualties were surgical, precise losses that suggested calculated risks rather than desperate fighting. This wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration. "Pull back to defensive formation," he ordered, his voice cracking slightly. "All ships, establish overlapping fields of fire and prepare for—" His words were cut off as something struck his own flagship. The massive dreadnought shuddered as human weapons tore through sections of hull that should have been impenetrable. Damage reports flooded in from all decks as his crew struggled to comprehend what was happening to them. Captain Park's voice crackled over the communications again, and this time there was something almost gentle in his tone. "Commander Morgath, you still have approximately 300 ships remaining. I suggest you use them to evacuate your wounded and withdraw from this system. You have exactly 1 hour before we resume targeting your vessels." As alarms blared, throughout his flagship, and the tactical display showed the expanding debris fields where 200 Vorthak warships used to be, Morgath finally understood the terrible truth. These weren't primitive mammals defending their homeworld. These were apex predators who had been waiting patiently for their prey to come within range. High Commander Zektar stood in the center of the Vorthak Empire's most secure war room, surrounded by holographic displays that painted a picture of absolute catastrophe. The massive chamber, carved from solid rock deep within the imperial capital, had once been a symbol of unshakable power. Now it felt more like a tomb. Red warning lights blinked across 17 different star system maps. Each light represented Vorthak position under attack, destroyed or simply vanished without a trace. The Grand Armada that had been assembled to crush human resistance, 8,000 of the Empire's finest warships, was being picked apart, piece by piece, across multiple sectors simultaneously. "Explain this to me," Zektar growled at his assembled staff, his forearms gesturing angrily at the displays. "How is a species with 12 ships attacking us in 17 different locations at the same time?" Intelligence Chief Morvac shifted uncomfortably, his chitinous plates clicking together. The reports in his claws made no tactical sense. "Sir, the attacks appear coordinated but impossible. Human vessels are striking supply convoys in the Kepler sector while simultaneously hitting communication arrays in the Vega system. The time. Stamps indicate these attacks are happening within minutes of each other." "That's physically impossible," snarled Admiral Kethron from across the room. "Even with their fastest ships, it would take days to travel between those systems. They can't be everywhere at once." But the evidence was undeniable. Surveillance footage showed human ships appearing out of nowhere at remote supply depots, weapons blazing with surgical precision. They would destroy critical components, eliminate defensive forces, and vanish back into space before any response could be mounted. The attacks weren't random either. Every target was carefully chosen to cause maximum disruption to Vorthak operations. "Show me the Rigel incident again," Zektar commanded. The central hologram shifted to display a recording from 3 days earlier. A massive Vorthak supply convoy, heavily escorted, was moving through what should have been secure space. Without warning, human ships appeared from multiple vectors, moving in perfect coordination, despite having no apparent communication between vessels. The attack lasted exactly 14 minutes. Every supply ship was destroyed, but not before the humans had somehow extracted their cargo bays. The escort vessels found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move, countering standard Vorthak tactics as if they had been studied for centuries. "They knew our patrol schedules," Morvac reported quietly. "They knew which routes our convoys would take, which frequencies our communications used, even which commanders would be leading specific operations. It's as if they have access to our most classified strategic databases." The implications of that statement sent a chill through the assembled officers. If humans had infiltrated Vorthak military networks, then no position was safe, no operation secure. Suddenly, every communication screen in the war room flickered to life simultaneously. Admiral Kim's face appeared on each display, her expression calm and professional despite the chaos she was causing across Vorthak space. "Commanders of the Vorthak Empire," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the room's speakers. 3 weeks ago, Ambassador Krelthak visited our space station. He was offered the opportunity to withdraw peacefully. You chose to ignore that offer." Zektar's mandibles clicked rapidly as he realized the transmission was appearing on every Vorthak frequency across their entire territory. Somehow humans had gained access to their most secure communication networks. "Every day you remain in our galaxy," Admiral Kim continued, "more of your people will die. This is not conquest, this is not warfare, this is extermination. You have turned the act of destroying civilizations into a science. Now you will learn what it feels like to be on the receiving end of that process." The display shifted to show Lieutenant Commander Yoon, a younger human officer whose expression was harder than stone. When he spoke, his words were automatically translated into perfect Vorthak dialect. "You call us primitive," Yoon said, his voice carrying an edge of barely controlled anger. "But you never asked the right questions. You never wondered why a primitive species had colonized 47 star systems without appearing on any of your surveys. You never questioned how we knew the exact number of worlds you'd conquered, the precise count of species you'd eliminated." Behind him, images began flashing across the screen. Worlds that the Vorthak had destroyed decades or even centuries ago. Species that had been wiped from existence so long ago that most Vorthak commanders had forgotten their names. But somehow, the humans remembered everything. The Altarians were artists, Yoon continued, his voice growing colder with each word. They created sculptures that could make you weep with their beauty. The Centauri were musicians whose symphonies could touch the soul of any living being. The Rigelians were philosophers who had solved questions about existence that plagued other species for millennia. More images flashed by. Families, children, entire civilizations reduced to historical footnotes in Vorthak military records. "We've been watching you for 800 years, Yoon revealed, and the war room fell completely silent. Preparing. Learning. Every species you destroyed was under our protection, but we let you kill them anyway. Do you know why?" Zektar felt his blood turn to ice as the horrible implications began to sink in. "Because we needed to understand your capabilities," Yoon explained. "Your tactics, your technology, your weaknesses. Every genocide you committed taught us something new about how to destroy you more efficiently. We let you murder our friends so we could learn how to murder you better." The transmission shifted back to Admiral Kim, whose expression remained professionally neutral despite the devastating words she was about to speak. "You've spent 3 millennia perfecting the art of extermination," she said quietly. "But you made one critical error. You assumed that a species capable of interstellar travel would reveal themselves to you openly. You never considered that an advanced civilization might choose to remain hidden, watching and learning from the shadows." Behind her, tactical displays showed the true scope of human presence in the galaxy. Not 12 ships, but thousands. Not a single homeworld, but dozens of colonies scattered across space that the Vorthak had never detected. The humans hadn't been primitive at all. They had been hiding in plain sight, building their strength while studying their enemies. "The hunt has begun," Admiral Kim concluded. "Every Vorthak ship, every Vorthak world, every Vorthak life is now a target. You will learn what those 800 species felt in their final moments. You will experience the terror of facing an enemy that sees you as nothing more than a problem to be solved." The transmission ended, leaving the Vorthak war room in stunned silence. Around the chamber, holographic displays continued to show red, warning lights spreading like an infection across their territory. The mighty Vorthak Empire, conquerors of 1,000 worlds, had become the hunted. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, human ships moved like ghosts, patient and methodical, carrying out a plan 8 centuries in the making. Commander. Velthar had commanded Vorthak warships for over a century, but he had never felt as helpless as he did now. The interrogation chamber aboard his own captured dreadnought was nothing like the torture rooms he had seen on conquered worlds. Instead of chains and implements of pain, there were only clean white walls, bright lights, and 2 humans sitting across from him at a simple metal table. The energy restraints around his wrists and ankles hummed softly, more sophisticated than anything in the Vorthak arsenal. He had tested them repeatedly during his first hours of captivity. They didn't cause pain, but they were absolutely impossible to break. Somehow, these primitive humans had developed containment technology that surpassed his empire's best efforts. Dr. Kang sat with perfect posture, consulting a datapad with the casual attention of someone reviewing a grocery list. She was smaller than most humans Velthar had seen, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her companion, Major Choi, leaned back in his chair with an relaxed confidence that was somehow more unnerving than any display of aggression. "You want to understand what we are?" Dr. Kang said without looking up from her datapad. "I should warn you that the answer might be disturbing, even by Vorthak standards." Velthar's mandibles clicked in defiance. Despite his situation, he was still a commander of the Empire. "You are nothing but an infant species stumbling around in the dark. Your technology is centuries behind ours. This victory of yours is temporary, at best." Major Choi's smile was the most terrifying thing Velthar had ever seen. It wasn't the snarl of an angry predator or the grimace of a warrior in battle. It was calm, patient, and completely without warmth. It was the expression of someone who had already decided that you were going to die and was simply working out the details. "Our technology?" Choi repeated, his tone conversational. "Commander, we've been using your own weapons against you for the past month. Every ship your forces have destroyed over the centuries, every colony you've raised, every piece of wreckage you left behind, we collected it all. We studied it, reverse-engineered it, and then improved upon it." He gestured around. "The pristine interrogation room. This ship you're sitting in? It's your own dreadnought, but we've upgraded the systems using principles your engineers never discovered. The weapons that tore through your fleet weren't human designs. They were Vorthak weapons, perfected by human understanding," Dr. Kang finally looked up from her datapad, her expression clinical and detached. "But superior technology isn't what makes us dangerous, Commander. Any species can eventually develop better weapons or faster ships. What makes humanity unique is something far more fundamental." She touched her datapad, and the wall behind her came alive with images. Genetic sequences, biological charts, and medical data scrolled past in patterns that made Velthar's head spin. "For the past 3 centuries," Dr. Kang continued, "humanity has engaged in the most ambitious selective breeding program in galactic history. We didn't breed for intelligence, though that increased as a side effect. We didn't breed for physical strength or longevity. We bred for one specific trait, the psychological ability to wage war efficiently." Velthar's compound eyes focused on the data streaming across the wall. He was beginning to understand something that chilled him to his core. "We systematically eliminated genetic predispositions toward surrender, cowardice, and most importantly, mercy toward aggressors," Dr. Kang explained with the same tone she might use to discuss crop rotation. "Humans who showed reluctance to fight when necessary were discouraged from reproducing. Those who demonstrated tactical thinking, emotional control under pressure, and the ability to make hard decisions were given every advantage." The implications hit Velthar like a physical blow. You bred yourselves to be soldiers?" Major Choi leaned forward, his smile never wavering. "We bred ourselves to be your executioners, Commander. Every species you exterminated had families who loved them. They had art, music, poetry, dreams for the future. Every world you sterilized had children who would never grow up, parents who would never see their offspring succeed. Entire civilizations, with thousands of years of accumulated knowledge and culture. The wall display shifted to show images that made Velthar flinch. Not weapons or battle plans, but photographs. Families gathering for meals on worlds that no longer existed. Children playing games that would never be played again. Artists creating masterpieces that had been reduced to atomic dust. "We felt every death, Commander," Major Choi continued, his voice remaining perfectly level. "We mourned every lost civilization, grieved for every species that would never have the chance to reach the stars. And while we grieved, we planned. We decided that when the time came to return the favor, we would feel nothing but satisfaction." Dr. Kang pulled up another set of data. "The average human soldier today has been optimized through 3 centuries of selective breeding. We process combat stress more efficiently than any known species. We can make tactical decisions while under extreme pressure without hesitation. Most importantly, we can eliminate threats to our protected species without experiencing the psychological trauma that would cripple other races." She looked directly at Velthar, and her eyes were as cold as the void between stars. "Your species believes that conquest is natural, that the strong have the right to dominate the weak. But you made one critical error in your understanding of nature, Commander." "What error?" Velthar whispered, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. "You assumed that because we appeared weak, we actually were weak," Major Choi replied. "In nature, the most dangerous predators are often the ones that don't look threatening until it's too late. We spent 800 years appearing harmless, while we grew stronger, smarter, and more numerous. We let you commit genocide after genocide because each atrocity taught us something new about your capabilities and limitations." The wall display now showed tactical analysis, battle formations, and strategic assessments that spanned centuries. Every Vorthak military action had been observed, recorded, and studied in exhaustive detail. "We know how you think, how you fight, how you organize your forces," Dr. Kang said matter-of-factly. "We know your supply chains, your communication. Protocols your command structure. We've identified every weakness in your technology and every flaw in your tactics. Most importantly, we understand your psychology better than you understand yourselves. Major Choi stood up and walked to the wall display, pointing to a complex chart showing Vorthak expansion patterns. Your empire grew through a combination of technological superiority and psychological warfare. You convinced your enemies that resistance was futile by demonstrating overwhelming force, but that strategy only works when your enemy actually is inferior. He turned back to Velthar, and his smile had become something truly frightening. What happens when your enemy has been pretending to be inferior while actually becoming superior? What happens when the species you've been terrorizing reveals that they were never afraid of you at all? The interrogation room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the energy restraints. Velthar finally understood why he felt so helpless. He wasn't just a prisoner of war. He was a specimen, being studied by a species that had turned the elimination of threats into a precise science. The Vorthak Empire ends with your generation, Commander, Dr. Kang said quietly. We've already begun liberating the species you enslaved and restoring the worlds you damaged. Your people will have the choice to surrender and accept exile, or face the same fate you gave to 800 other civilizations. As the two humans gathered their materials and prepared to leave, Velthar realized the most terrifying truth of all. They weren't angry. They weren't seeking revenge. They were simply solving a problem that had been bothering them for 8 centuries, with the same methodical efficiency they might use to repair a broken machine. Humanity hadn't just defeated the Vorthak Empire. They had made its destruction inevitable from the moment they decided that no other species would suffer the fate of the Altarians. The great crystal dome that had once crowned the Vorthak imperial capital lay in shattered pieces across the marble plaza. Emperor Kethmaran, the destroyer of worlds, who had ruled over 10,000 star systems and commanded the deaths of entire civilizations, now knelt among the rubble of his throne room with his once magnificent carapace cracked and bleeding. Above him, through the broken dome, alien ships moved across the sky in perfect formation. Human vessels flew alongside craft from dozens of species that had been enslaved for centuries. The Altarian art ships with their flowing organic curves, the geometric precision of Centauri exploration vessels, the massive cargo haulers of the Rigelian mining guilds, all of them free now, all of them part of something the galaxy had never seen before, a coalition built on protection rather than conquest. General Song stood before the fallen emperor, her crisp military uniform somehow remaining pristine, despite the devastation surrounding them. She was not tall by human standards, but her presence filled the ruined throne room with quiet authority. Behind her, human soldiers maintained a respectful distance, while engineers worked to stabilize the damaged structure. Why? Kethmaran gasped, his voice barely above a whisper. Green blood seeped from cracks in his exoskeleton where falling debris had struck him during the final assault. Why spare any of us? Your kind could complete the genocide, finish what you started. Why show mercy to monsters? Colonel Han stepped forward from General Song's entourage, carrying a data tablet that glowed softly in the dim light, filtering through the broken dome. He was younger than the general, with the kind of calm professionalism that came from years of military service. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of historical record. 800 species, he read aloud from the tablet. 47 billion sentient beings eliminated over 3 millennia of Vorthak expansion. Every world sterilized, every culture erased, every civilization reduced to archaeological footnotes in your imperial archives. The numbers hung in the air like an accusation. Kethmaran had heard them before, of course. They were points of pride. In Vorthak military academies, proof of their empire's unstoppable might. Now spoken by a human officer in the ruins of his capital, they sounded like something else entirely. General Song's expression remained neutral as she gazed down at the broken emperor. We could kill every last one of you, she said quietly. It would be justice, perfect mathematical justice, an eye for an eye, a species for every species. But someone needs to remember what happened here, Kethmaran. Someone needs to carry the message To whatever species might be foolish enough to follow in your footsteps." She gestured toward the shattered dome where the liberation fleets continued their careful patrol patterns. The sight was both beautiful and terrible. Hundreds of ships working together in harmony, representing dozens of civilizations that had thought themselves extinct just months ago. "The Altarians are rebuilding their homeworld," General Song continued, her voice taking on an almost gentle tone. "We found genetic samples in your research facilities and restored their population. Their first children in 3 centuries were born last week. The Centauri colonies are establishing new trade routes between star systems they thought they'd never see again. The Rigelians are composing symphonies about freedom that will be remembered for 1,000 years." Kethmoran's compound eyes tracked the movement of the ships above. Each vessel represented a civilization his empire had tried to erase, now flying free under human protection. The irony was not lost on him. The species he had dismissed as primitive mammals had become the galaxy's guardians. "Every species you enslaved now stands under humanity's protection," General Song added. "Not as subjects or vassals, but as allies and friends. We're teaching them what you never learned. That strength comes from cooperation, not domination." The Emperor's voice was barely audible when he spoke again. "What are you? What have you become?" General Song's answer was immediate and unflinching. "We're what you created, Emperor. 800 years ago, when your empire first encountered humanity, you could have chosen differently. You could have offered trade agreements, cultural exchanges, peaceful coexistence. Instead, you chose to become monsters who viewed other species as resources to be exploited or obstacles to be eliminated." She knelt down so that her eyes were level with his, and Kethmoran saw something in her gaze that chilled him more than any threat could have. It wasn't hatred or anger. It was the cold certainty of someone who had solved a problem that had been bothering them for centuries. "So we became something worse than monsters," she continued. "We became justice. We became the thing that monsters fear in the dark. We became the species that says no more and has the power to make it stick." Colonel Han consulted his tablet again. "The last Vorthak military installation surrendered 6 hours ago. All enslaved populations have been liberated. War crimes tribunals are being established on 14 worlds to address the worst atrocities. The Empire is finished, but the species will survive in exile." General Song stood up, brushing dust from her uniform. "You have a choice now, Kethmoran. You can spend your remaining years in comfortable exile, writing memoirs that no one will read, or you can do something useful for the first time in your life." The Emperor looked up at her with confusion. "What do you mean?" "Tell the galaxy what happened here," she said simply. "Travel to the outer rim, to the unexplored sectors, to any species that might still believe conquest is a viable strategy. Tell them about the empire that thought it was invincible. Tell them about the species that looked weak until they revealed their true nature." She turned to leave, then paused at the edge of the ruined throne room. "Tell them that when humans offer peace, they should accept it. Tell them that when humans say flee, they should have listened. Tell them what happens to species that mistake patience for weakness." As the human delegation departed, Kethmoran was left alone among the ruins of his empire. Above him, the liberation fleets continued their work, rescuing survivors, distributing aid, and beginning the long process of rebuilding. What the Vorthak had destroyed, he understood now what his true punishment would be. Death would have been merciful. Even genocide would have been simpler. Instead, he would live with the knowledge of what his empire had become and what it had created in response. He would spend his remaining years as a living, cautionary tale, forever spreading the message that some species should never be underestimated. The age of Vorthak dominion was over. The empire that had conquered 1,000 worlds, enslaved hundreds of species, and terrorized entire sectors of the galaxy had been brought to its knees by the very creatures they had dismissed as harmless. The age of human protection had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. In the years to come, when aggressive species encountered humanity's peaceful first contact teams, they would remember the story of the Vorthak Empire. They would remember what happened to those who chose conquest over cooperation, and they would choose differently. Because somewhere in the dark between the stars, Patient and watchful, humanity waited with the quiet confidence of a species that had turned the protection of the innocent into an art form. The galaxy's silent guardians had finally revealed themselves, and the universe was a safer place for it.